An arrogant millionaire is rescued by a blind young woman on the street. A mysterious phrase about his family's past shakes his beliefs. Ancient documents reveal secrets he wasn't ready to discover. A dark past connects their lives in an unimaginable way. Nathan Thompson adjusted his Italian silk tie for the third time as he observed his reflection in the elevator's panoramic mirror. From the 42nd floor of the most luxurious building in New York, he gazed upon the city he had always considered his personal property. At 35, he was the youngest CEO of Thompson Industries, though that title had come with a price he still didn't fully understand. "Mr. Thompson, everyone is already waiting in the main hall," his assistant Emily informed him through the intercom. Her voice carried that tone of urgency Nathan despised. "Tell them the owner of the company arrives when he pleases," he replied curtly, adjusting his shirt cuffs. Tonight's event was supposed to be just another corporate celebration, another trophy for his already cluttered shelf of achievements. The magazine Business and Power had named him Businessman of the Year, and the award ceremony was taking place in his own glass and steel empire. Yet something in the air felt different, a restlessness he couldn't quite name. As he entered the hall, Nathan was greeted by the customary applause. Familiar faces, rehearsed smiles, pats on the back, the usual ritual. Among the attendees, he noticed the unwelcome presence of Richard Martinez, his main rival on the board of directors. The gray-haired man was conversing in a corner with other executives, casting furtive glances in his direction. "Nathan, my boy," Richard's deep voice echoed through the hall. "Come here. We were just talking about you." With confident strides and his usual air of superiority, Nathan crossed the room. The murmur of conversations gradually faded, creating an unsettling silence. "Richard, what a pleasant surprise," he lied, extending his hand. "I didn't know you'd be attending." "And missed the chance to see the great Nathan Thompson receive yet another award?" "Never." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes, especially considering the circumstances. Before Nathan could question him, the lights in the hall dimmed, and a hostess took the stage. The moment of the award ceremony had arrived. He straightened his jacket, preparing for his moment of glory. "Good evening, everyone," the hostess began. "We are here to celebrate the most significant achievements in the American business world. However, before we proceed with the awards, we have an important announcement." Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't part of the script. The organizing committee received a few hours ago documents that reveal serious irregularities in the management of Thompson Industries, she continued, her voice echoing through the now completely silent hall. Time seemed to freeze. Nathan looked around, searching for some support, but found only expressions of feigned surprise and malicious smiles. His allies seemed to have evaporated. "These accusations," the host continued, "include financial data manipulation and unethical practices in dealing with competing companies." Richard Martinez stepped forward, his voice laden with false concern. "Nathan, as chairman of the board, I must inform you that an emergency meeting has been called. Your presence will be required tomorrow at 9 a.m. The room began to spin. Nathan loosened his tie, feeling suffocated. Martinez's words seemed to come from far away. "I suggest you prepare a good explanation." Within minutes, the room started to empty. People who had been vying for his attention moments ago now avoided his gaze. His assistant, Emily, approached. Hesitantly, "Mr. Thompson, your security team, they were dismissed an hour ago. Board's orders." Nathan staggered to the elevator, his mind a whirlwind of disjointed thoughts. How had this happened? Who had betrayed him? The doors closed, and he caught his reflection again. Now he no longer saw the powerful CEO, but a defeated man, abandoned by those he thought were loyal. As he reached the sidewalk, a light drizzle fell over New York. His driver had also disappeared. Cars sped by, splashing dirty water, completely ignoring his presence. Nathan Thompson, the man who just hours ago controlled an empire, was now alone in the cold night of a city that never forgave the defeated. Feeling a growing dizziness, he leaned against a wall. His vision began to darken at the edges, and his legs weakened. The last thought before he passed out was how, in a matter For 5 minutes, his entire world had crumbled. Then everything went dark. Consciousness returned to Nathan gradually, like waves breaking on the shore. First, he felt the cold concrete beneath his body, then the distant noise of traffic. Voices passed by him, some footsteps diverted around his fallen body. But no one stopped to help. It was as if he had become invisible, he who had always demanded to be the center of attention. "Excuse me, sir, do you need help?" The soft, concerned female voice seemed out of place in that hostile setting. Nathan opened his eyes with difficulty, finding a young woman leaning toward him. She held a white cane, and her eyes, though beautiful, had a distant gaze, characteristic of someone who could not see. I'm fine," he lied, trying to get up and failing miserably. "Clearly you're not," she replied with a slight smile. "I'm Eleanor. Let me help you." Before he could protest, Eleanor extended her free hand. Nathan hesitated. He wasn't used to accepting help, especially not from strangers, especially now when his life had imploded so spectacularly. How did you know I was here?" he asked, reluctantly accepting her support. "I overheard some teenagers talking about a guy in a suit passed out on the sidewalk. I decided to check it out. No one deserves to be left alone on the street, no matter the circumstances." With surprising skill, Eleanor guided him to a nearby cafe. The place was simple, very different from the spots Nathan usually frequented. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and cheese bread filled the cozy space. "Mrs. Margaret," Eleanor called, "could you bring a strong coffee and a glass of water, please?" A motherly-looking woman appeared from behind the counter, casting a curious glance at the unlikely pair. "Of course, dear. And who's your friend?" Nathan opened his mouth to introduce himself but hesitated. His name, once synonymous with power and prestige, could now be splashed across scandalous headlines in every newspaper. "Just someone who needed help," Eleanor replied, sensing his hesitation. As he sipped the coffee, Nathan observed his rescuer with growing curiosity. Eleanor appeared to be in her early 30s, dressed simply but elegantly, and there was something in her demeanor that suggested a complex story behind that calm exterior. "Why are you helping me?" he finally asked, his voice still tinged with suspicion. Eleanor tilted her head slightly as if pondering her response. "Because I've been at rock bottom too, and because, unlike you, I had people who reached out to me when I needed it most." Her words hit Nathan like a punch to the gut. How could she know? "I don't need to see to know you're going through a tough time," she continued, as if reading his thoughts. "Your voice, your breathing, the smell of expensive liquor mixed with despair, it all tells a story." Nathan fumbled in his coat pocket, searching for his wallet. "I appreciate your help, but—" "No," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "Don't you dare try to pay me. Some things in life are priceless, sir." "Nathan," he finished, surprised by his own honesty. A flicker of recognition passed over Eleanor's face, so quickly he almost missed it. She stood abruptly, grabbing her cane. "I need to go," she said, her voice now carrying a different tone, more distant. "I hope you find your way, Nathan Thompson." He stood too, alarmed. "How do you know my last name? I didn't—" Helena was already near the door when she turned, an enigmatic smile on her lips. "If you knew what your family did to mine," she murmured, before disappearing into the New York night. Nathan remained still, Eleanor's words echoing in his mind. The coffee cooled in front of him, forgotten, as an unsettling feeling settled in his chest. That seemingly casual encounter had just taken on much more complex contours. Mrs. Margaret approached to collect the cup, observing his troubled expression. "You know, young man," she commented, "sometimes we need to lose everything to see what's always been right in front of us." Nathan barely registered the woman's words. His mind was focused on Eleanor and her enigmatic final statement. Who was she really? What had his family done? And why, even amidst the chaos his life had become, couldn't he stop thinking about those eyes that couldn't see but seemed to peer into his soul? The next morning, Nathan woke up in his penthouse with a sense of unreality. The headlines on the major news portals confirmed his worst fears. Thompson Industries under investigation. Air faces mismanagement allegations. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages and missed calls, most from people demanding explanations he didn't have. The board meeting was scheduled in an hour, but his thoughts kept returning to Eleanor and her cryptic words. As his private driver, who had mysteriously reappeared that morning with 1,000 apologies, drove him to the company headquarters, Nathan scoured his memory, trying to find some connection to the past. "You don't look well," observed Charles, his driver of over a decade, through the rearview mirror. "Did something happen beyond what's in the papers?" Nathan hesitated. Charles was one of the few employees who had known the company since his father's time. "Charles, do you remember any family that was harmed by the Thompsons' business dealings, especially one that had a daughter?" The driver adjusted the rearview mirror, his face showing discomfort. "Mr. Nathan, your father, well, he had his own ways of conducting business. Many families were affected over the years. I need more details, Charles, it's important." "Well," the older man seemed to choose his words carefully. "There was the case of the Vale family, a traditional family that lost everything after a hostile takeover, and the Mendes family, who sold their company under suspicious circumstances. There was also that story with the clinics that—" "What clinics?" Nathan interrupted, feeling his heart race. "The Hope Clinics. It was a network managed by the Sanders family. But that was a long time ago, before the incident." Before Nathan could ask more, they arrived at the company headquarters. The building, which had always filled him with pride, now seemed like a hostile fortress. Reporters crowded the entrance, eager for a statement from the disgraced heir. In the elevator, Nathan tried to organize his thoughts. He needed to face the board, but Eleanor's words and Charles's information had stirred something unsettling in his memory. He vaguely recalled whispered conversations between his father and the executives, documents being shredded late at night, names that were never mentioned again. As he entered the boardroom, he found familiar faces transformed into masks of judgment. Richard Martinez sat at the head of the table, a thick folder of documents in front of him. "Nathan," Martinez began, his tone falsely cordial, "before we formally begin, I'd like to give you the opportunity to voluntarily step down from your position. It would be more dignified." "Based on what accusations?" retorted Nathan, maintaining his composure. "Come now, don't play dumb. We have here," Martinez tapped the folder, "enough evidence to prove that you continued your father's questionable practices. The difference is he knew how to protect himself better." And the mention of his father made Nathan shudder. What questionable practices? The same strategy that destroyed so many families over the years. Predatory acquisitions, market manipulation, systematic destruction of competitors. Martinez smiled cruelly. "Including some that resulted in quite tragic consequences." An image began to form in Nathan's mind. Old newspaper clippings he had seen in his father's office, headlines about the sudden closure of a network of clinics, protests from ruined families. Could it be Eleanor? "You have 1 hour," Martinez continued, interrupting his thoughts. "Either resign voluntarily, keeping some privileges, or we'll do this the hard way." Nathan stood up slowly, ignoring the glances from the other board members. "Before making any decision, I need to check some things in the company's old archives." "The archives are temporarily inaccessible," Martinez replied quickly. Too quickly. "As the majority shareholder, I demand immediate access," Nathan shot back, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "Is there something specific you don't want me to find, Richard?" Martinez's smile faltered for a moment. "Are you in a position to make demands, Nathan? Think carefully. Some doors once opened cannot be closed again." Leaving the boardroom, Nathan felt simultaneously defeated and determined. Martinez's veiled threats, combined with the mystery of Eleanor, pointed to something bigger than a simple corporate coup. There were secrets buried in the past of Thompson Industries, secrets that someone wanted to keep hidden at all costs. In his office, while organizing his personal belongings, Nathan found an old photo. In it, his father was smiling alongside a group of doctors in front of a building with the logo of Hope Clinics. On the back, a handwritten note, "Vision Project, 1995. The date made his stomach churn. It was the year Eleanor would have been a child. Eleanor walked with steady steps through the halls of the Music Institute, where she taught piano, her cane gliding smoothly over the familiar floor. The sounds of different instruments mingled in the air, creating a chaotic symphony she had learned to love over the years. But today her thoughts were far from music. "Eleanor!" The voice of her friend and fellow teacher, Beatrice, echoed down the hallway. "You won't believe what's in all the newspapers. Thompson Industries—" "I know," Eleanor interrupted, her voice tense. "Actually, Bea, I need to tell you something. Last night I ran into him." "Ran into who?" Beatrice moved closer, lowering her voice. "Nathan Thompson." The silence that followed was heavy. Beatrice knew the whole story. She was one of the few people who knew the truth about Eleanor's past and her connection to the Thompson family. "It was by chance," Eleanor continued as they entered her classroom. "He was passed out on the sidewalk after that scandal at the awards ceremony. I helped him." "You helped him?" Beatrice sounded incredulous. "Eleanor, after everything his family did—" I know, but in that moment he seemed as lost as I once was." Eleanor sat down at the piano, her fingers lightly brushing the keys. "And maybe it's time for the truth to come out." "Did you tell him?" "Not exactly, but I left a clue. Something tells me he's going to start digging." The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted their conversation. One of the reception staff hurried in. "Professor Eleanor, sorry to interrupt, but there's a man here who wants to speak with you. He says it's important." Eleanor felt her heart race. "What's his name?" "Charles. He said he's the driver for the Thompson family." Beatrice let out a surprised exclamation, but Eleanor remained calm. "Please ask him to come in." Charles's heavy footsteps echoed through the room. Eleanor could sense the man's nervousness. "Miss Eleanor," he began hesitantly, "I'm sorry to come like this, but after Mr. Nathan asked me about families harmed by the company in the past, I started putting the pieces together." "You're Dr. Sanders' daughter, aren't you?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm the daughter of the former director of Hope Clinics." "Why are you here, Charles?" "Because I was there, miss, on the day of the incident, and I've carried this weight for years." The driver's voice trembled. "Mr. Nathan is digging into the past and Mr. Martinez is doing everything to stop him. I thought you should know." Eleanor rose from the piano, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. "What exactly do you know about that day, Charles? I know it wasn't an accident like they said. The Vision Project, there was something wrong with those experimental procedures. Your father found out and tried to expose it, but my father was silenced," Eleanor finished, her voice bitter. "And I, one of the project's patients, lost my sight in the process." "Miss?" Charles took a step forward, his voice urgent. "There's more. Mr. Thompson Sr., before he passed, left a letter. It's in an old safe in the company's basement. Mr. Nathan doesn't know about it, but I saw it being stored. And Mr. Martinez, he would do anything to ensure that letter is never found." Eleanor felt Beatrice hold her hand in support. Years of unanswered questions, of pent-up pain, seemed on the verge of finding resolution. "Why are you telling me this now, Charles?" "Because Mr. Nathan, he's different from his father. And today, when he started asking questions, I saw in his eyes the same determination that was in his father's eyes when he tried to expose the truth. He deserves to know, and you deserve justice." Eleanor walked to the window, feeling the afternoon sun on her face. For years she had channeled her pain through music, turning her loss into art. But now the past was knocking at her door, demanding to be confronted. "Where can I find Nathan?" she finally asked. "He usually goes to Central Perk in the late afternoon when he wants to think," replied Charles. "It's a discreet place away from the reporters." "Beatrice," Eleanor turned to her friend, "can you cancel my lessons for today? I have an important meeting." "Eleanor, are you sure after all this time?" "Yes," she replied, picking up her cane. "It's time for some truths to come to light. And maybe it's time for both families to find peace." Central Perk was one of those places that resisted time and the city's modernization. Its old wooden furniture and the aroma of freshly ground coffee created an atmosphere reminiscent of a gentler, less frantic New York. Nathan was sitting in a discreet corner, an untouched cup of coffee in front of him, when he noticed Eleanor's arrival. She moved with natural elegance, her cane barely touching the ground in precise movements. Some customers watched her with curiosity, but her face conveyed a serenity that contrasted with Nathan's evident nervousness. "May I sit?" asked Eleanor, her voice soft but firm. "Please," replied Nathan, instinctively rising to help her, but quickly realizing she didn't need assistance. A heavy silence settled between them. The cafe's chatter seemed distant, as if they were in a private bubble of time and space. "I imagine Charles has spoken with you," began Nathan, breaking the silence. "Yes, he met me at the Music Institute." Eleanor tilted her head slightly. "You know, it's ironic. I lost my sight, but I gained music. The universe has a peculiar sense of humor." Nathan swallowed hard. "Eleanor, I found an old photo from the Vision Project, but there are so many gaps, so many questions." "Then ask," she said simply. "It's time for the truth to come out, don't you think?" Nathan took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. "Was your father the director of the Hope Clinics?" "Dr. Anthony Sanders," Eleanor confirmed. "One of the most respected ophthalmologists in the country, until his partnership with your father, Robert Thompson." The way she pronounced Nathan's father's name carried years of pent-up pain. "What exactly happened?" "The Hope Clinics were a reference for ophthalmological treatments," Eleanor began, her fingers gently tapping on the table. "My father developed revolutionary techniques, saved the sight of hundreds of people, but he needed investment to expand the research. That's when your father showed up with a seemingly irresistible offer." A waitress approached to take Eleanor's order, chamomile tea, and Nathan used the moment to observe her more closely. There was a strength in her posture that intrigued him, a dignity that not even tragedy could shake. "The Vision Project," Eleanor continued after the waitress walked away, "started as something promising, a partnership between my father's medical expertise and the Thompsons' financial power. I was only 12 at the time, and I suffered from an eye condition that, according to the doctors, could be corrected with a new experimental procedure." "You were one of the patients," Nathan murmured, the realization hitting him like a punch. "The first, actually. My father trusted the procedure so much that he decided his own daughter would be the initial patient." Eleanor paused, taking a sip of the tea that had just arrived. But something went wrong. It wasn't just a common medical mistake. My father discovered that the equipment provided by Thompson Industries was defective, that safety protocols had been ignored to cut costs. Nathan felt his stomach churn. "And when your father tried to expose it, his family destroyed him," Eleanor finished, her voice surprisingly calm. "Not just professionally, they ruined his reputation, his savings, his dignity. He was never able to practice medicine again. The brilliant man I knew in my childhood became a shadow, consumed by guilt and remorse." "Eleanor, Nathan reached his hand across the table, hesitant. "I didn't know. I was just a child back then." "I know," she replied, surprising him by not pulling her hand away when he lightly touched it. "That's why I'm here, because I realize that you, like me, are both a victim and an heir to choices that weren't yours. But now I have a chance to do something about it," Nathan said, his voice growing determined. "Charles mentioned a letter in the old safe. If we can find it—" "It won't be easy," Eleanor interrupted. "Martinez and his allies will do everything to stop us. They have as much to lose as your family did back then. Why are you willing to help me, after everything my family did to yours?" Eleanor finally withdrew her hand, but her face softened with a sad smile. "Because I've learned that holding onto hate is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. And because, unlike your father, you still have the chance to choose what kind of man you want to be." The cafe had emptied considerably, and the late afternoon light streamed through the old windows, casting long shadows. Nathan watched as she touched the edge of her cup with delicacy, her precise movements revealing years of adaptation to her condition. "Help me fix this," he asked, his voice low but intense. "I can't give you back your sight, but I can try to restore your father's honor, expose the truth, bring justice." "The truth comes at a high price, Nathan," Eleanor warned. "Are you prepared to lose everything that's left of your empire?" "I already lost everything last night," he replied with a wry smile. Or maybe it was the first time I truly saw anything. The next morning, Nathan's private office in his apartment looked like a battlefield. Old documents scattered everywhere. Newspaper clippings from the time of the Vision Project. Financial reports yellowed with age. Each paper was a piece of the puzzle he was trying to assemble. "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked Charles, who had arrived early to help with the investigation. The driver knew the company's files better than most, having transported confidential documents for years. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," replied Nathan, without taking his eyes off an especially bulky folder. "Look at this, Charles. The financial reports show massive diversions in the project's budget. The money that should have gone to quality equipment was diverted to offshore accounts," a woman's voice finished. Eleanor was standing at the door, accompanied by Beatrice. Nathan quickly stood up. "How?" "Your secretary, Emily, let me in," Eleanor explained. "Apparently she also has some interesting stories to tell about Mr. Martinez's management." Beatrice stepped forward, carrying a folder. "Eleanor asked me to digitize some documents that your father kept, reports that were never published, testimonies from other patients who were silenced." The group gathered around Nathan's desk. Charles prepared coffee for everyone, while Beatrice methodically organized the new documents alongside the ones they had already found. "My father used to say that the truth is like water," Eleanor commented, her fingers gliding over the papers. "It can be contained for a while, but it always finds a way to the surface. And the more they try to dam it, the stronger the force. When it breaks," Nathan added, looking at her with growing admiration. Emily, the secretary, hurried into the room. "Mr. Nathan, Mr. Martinez is coming up, and he's not alone." "We were expecting this," Eleanor said calmly. "Beatrice, you know what to do." As Beatrice quickly gathered the most important documents, stashing them in her bag, Nathan positioned himself near the door. The sound of the elevator announced the unwelcome arrival. "Nathan!" Martinez's voice thundered down the hallway. "We need to talk about your recent activities." When Martinez entered the office, accompanied by two lawyers, his triumphant expression turned to surprise upon seeing the gathered group. His eyes fixed on Eleanor, and for a moment, a flicker of recognition and fear crossed his face. Well, he said, regaining his composure. "I see you're having a little meeting, Miss Sanders, I presume." "Correct, Mr. Martinez," replied Eleanor, standing up. "We were just discussing the events of 1995. You remember that year well, don't you?" Martinez paled slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about. Nathan, I came to warn you that your actions could have serious consequences." The board will find out the truth," interrupted Nathan, "about the Vision Project, about the embezzlement, about how you helped my father cover it all up." "Be careful with your accusations, boy," Martinez growled. "You have no proof of anything." "Not yet," agreed Eleanor, her voice conveying serene confidence. "But you know what we do have? The letter Robert Thompson left in the old safe." The change in Martinez's expression was instantaneous. "Impossible. That letter was destroyed." "That's what you thought," interjected Charles, stepping forward. "But Robert made me promise to keep it safe, for the day his son was ready for the truth." The silence that followed was deafening. Martinez looked from one face to another, like a cornered animal. "You don't understand," he said finally, his arrogance giving way to an almost pleading tone. "We did what was necessary. The company was on the brink of bankruptcy. The Vision Project was our only way out." "Necessary?" Eleanor's voice trembled for the first time. "Was it necessary to ruin the lives of dozens of people? To destroy my father's career? Steal my vision?" Nathan approached Eleanor, placing a hand on her shoulder in silent support. "It's over, Martinez. It's time to fix the mistakes of the past." "You have no idea what you're doing," Martinez threatened, backing toward the door. "This will destroy everything. The company, your legacy, your reputation. Some things are more important than money and power," Nathan replied. "It took me a while to learn that, but now I know." When Martinez and his lawyers left, the group remained silent for a few moments. It was Eleanor who finally spoke. "He'll try to stop us from reaching the vault." "Yes," Nathan agreed, "but he forgets we're not alone in this fight." Eleanor smiled, extending her hand which Nathan firmly grasped. In that moment, both felt that something greater was in motion. It wasn't just about exposing the truth or seeking justice. It was about redemption, about breaking the cycle of lies that had poisoned their families for so long. "The next step," Eleanor said, "is to find that letter, and this time no one will stop us from revealing the truth." The basement of Thompson Industries held decades of history within its dimly lit corridors. Nathan had never paid much attention to this place, but now, following Charles through the maze of files and storage rooms, he felt the weight of family history with every step. "The vault is in the oldest part of the building," Charles explained, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Your father kept the most important documents down here, away from prying eyes." Eleanor walked beside Nathan, her cane occasionally, tapping the walls. "The smell of mold and old paper," she commented. "It reminds me of the clinic basement where my father kept patient records." "How can we be sure Martinez hasn't gotten here first?" asked Beatrice, who had come as additional support. "Because he doesn't have the combination," Charles replied, stopping in front of an old metal door. "And he doesn't even know exactly where to look." Nathan surveyed the surroundings, metal shelves stretched to the ceiling, filled with dusty boxes and yellowed file folders. In one corner, a stack of seemingly abandoned files caught his attention. "Wait," Eleanor said suddenly, her head tilted in concentration. "Do you hear that?" The group fell silent. At first, Nathan didn't notice anything, but then... "Footsteps," whispered Beatrice. "There's someone else down here." Charles quickly guided them behind a tall bookshelf. Seconds later, voices echoed through the hallway. "It has to be somewhere." Vasquez's voice sounded irritated. "That paranoid old man documented everything. Search every file, every folder." Nathan felt Eleanor grip his arm, her fingers pressing lightly in a silent warning. Vasquez's group was getting closer to their position. "Sir," an unfamiliar voice spoke up, "we found something interesting. Records of the Vision Project, but they're incomplete. It looks like pages were removed." "Of course they were," Vasquez growled. "Robert wasn't a fool. He must have kept the important parts somewhere else. Keep looking." Nathan peered through a gap between the boxes. Vasquez was accompanied by 3 men, all methodically searching the shelves. They were moving toward the vault. "We need to distract them," whispered Eleanor. "Charles, where exactly is the vault?" "Behind the 1990 accounting file," the driver replied in the same hushed tone. "Camouflaged in the wall, but we'll need light to see the mechanism." Eleanor smiled. "Light won't be a problem for me. I have an idea, but I'll need everyone's help." As she explained her plan, the footsteps of Vasquez and his group gradually faded away. Nathan marveled at Eleanor's clarity of thought, even under pressure. "Beatrice," Eleanor instructed, "you'll create a distraction at the other end of the hallway. Charles, do you know of any alternative exits from here?" "There's an emergency staircase at the end of the west corridor," he replied. "Perfect. Nathan, you and I will head to the vault while they're distracted. Your fingers are more sensitive to touch because of the music, aren't they?" "Yes," she confirmed. "I can feel the differences in the mechanism, but I'll need your hands to guide mine." The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. Beatrice prepared to create the distraction, while Charles memorized the escape route. "Eleanor," Nathan called softly before they moved, "why are you risking so much for this? Haven't you suffered enough because of my family?" She turned her face toward him, her eyes, though unable to see, conveying an intensity that deeply moved him. "Because some truths need to come to light, Nathan. Not for the past, but for the future. And because..." She hesitated briefly. "Because I've seen in you something your father never had, the courage to face your own mistakes." In that moment, surrounded by decades of secrets and lies, something shifted between them. They were no longer just allies in a quest for justice, but 2 people connected by a destiny that needed to be rewritten. "Are you ready?" asked Beatrice, holding a stack of old folders. Nathan intertwined his fingers with Eleanor's, feeling the calm strength radiating from her. "Ready," he replied. In the next moment, the sound of dozens of folders falling echoed from the other side of the basement, followed by surprised exclamations. It was time to act. As Martinez and his men rushed toward the noise, Nathan and Eleanor moved silently. Toward the vault, Charles stood guard watching the hallway. "To your left," whispered Nathan, guiding Eleanor's hands over the metallic surface of the vault. "Do you feel the markings?" "Yes," she replied, her fingers sliding precisely over the mechanism. "It's like a piano keyboard. Each number has a slightly different texture." Time seemed to drag as Eleanor worked on the mechanism, her sensitive fingers detecting nuances that Nathan's eyes would never perceive. At any moment, Martinez could return. "Almost there," murmured Eleanor. "Just one more sequence." A soft click echoed in the silence, and the vault door opened slightly. The inside of the vault smelled of old paper and metal. Nathan fumbled through the dark space with a small flashlight, while Eleanor remained alert to any sounds in the corridors. The beam of light revealed neatly stacked piles of documents, each carefully labeled with the precise handwriting of his father. "There's a lot here," whispered Nathan, quickly flipping through the folders. "Contracts, deeds, wait, I found something." It was a brown envelope, sealed with red wax bearing the inscription, "For my son when he is ready," in Robert Thompson's handwriting. Nathan felt his hands tremble slightly as he picked it up. "Hurry," Eleanor warned. "I hear footsteps coming." "The back." But before they could close the safe, a voice cut through the silence. What a touching scene. Martinez stood at the end of the hallway, a cruel smile on his lips. Two of his men held Beatrice, who struggled in vain. "Sorry," she gasped. "They caught me on the emergency stairs." "It's okay, Bea," reassured Eleanor, her voice calm despite the evident tension. "So," Martinez continued, slowly approaching, "the prodigal son has finally found the famous letter. You know, Nathan, your father was an interesting man, so calculating in business, yet so sentimental in his final days." "You knew everything," accused Nathan, instinctively shielding Eleanor. "You helped cover up what happened in the Vision project." "I helped save the company," Martinez exploded. "Your father was obsessed with that project. He invested millions in experimental research, ignoring the risks. When things started going wrong, someone had to make tough decisions." Eleanor stepped forward, her posture upright and defiant. "Tough decisions? Is that how you justified destroying the lives of dozens of people?" "It was necessary," Martinez defended himself, but his voice wavered slightly. "Dr. Sanders was about to expose everything. That would have ruined not only Thompson Industries, but the entire medical sector that relied on our investments." "So you silenced him," continued Eleanor, her voice heavy with years of pent-up pain. "Destroyed his reputation, his research, and turned your own failures into profit," Nathan added, a sudden realization hitting him. "The faulty equipment, the unsuccessful procedures, you used that to manipulate the company's stock in the market." Martinez laughed, a humorless sound. "I always underestimated your intelligence, Nathan. Perhaps you've inherited more from your father than I imagined. Now let's be practical. Hand me the letter." "No," Nathan replied firmly. "No more secrets, no more lies." "You don't understand," Martinez insisted, his mask of control beginning to crack. "That letter doesn't just contain the truth about Project Vision. Your father documented everything. Every decision, every person involved. If this gets out—" "That's exactly what's going to happen," interrupted a new voice. Charles emerged from the shadows, accompanied by Emily, and to everyone's surprise, 2 agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission. "Sorry for the delay," Emily said, smiling at Nathan. "I had to make sure our guests found their way here." Martinez visibly paled. His men, sensing the shift in the situation, released Beatrice, who ran to Eleanor's side. "Mr. Martinez," announced one of the agents, "we have some questions about certain financial irregularities that have been brought to our attention." As Martinez was led out of the basement, Nathan carefully opened the envelope. Eleanor stayed by his side, a comforting presence as he began to read his father's final words. "My son," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it's because you've finally found the courage to question the empire I built, an empire erected on rotten foundations of greed and pride." Nathan felt tears forming in his eyes as he read. The letter was a full confession, not just of the events of Project Vision, but of years of manipulations and unethical decisions that had destroyed lives in the name of profit. "What does it say?" Eleanor asked softly. "He knew," Nathan replied, his voice choked. He knew what they were doing was wrong. In the last months before he passed, he planned to expose everything, make amends with his father, try to fix things, but he ran out of time. Eleanor found his hand in the dark, intertwining her fingers with his. "So now it's your chance to do what he couldn't." "It won't be easy," Emily warned, having returned after accompanying the agents. "The press already knows about what's happened. The board will panic." "It doesn't matter," Nathan decided, carefully putting the letter away. "It's time for Thompson Industries to make amends, and I'll need help to rebuild everything the right way." His gaze met Eleanor's, and even in the dim light of the basement, even through the barrier of blindness, a silent understanding passed between them. This was not just a story of justice or redemption. It was the beginning of something new, something built on a foundation stronger than money or power. "I think," Eleanor smiled, "I know some people who would be happy to help with this." The meeting room at Thompson Industries had never felt so full of energy. A week after the discovery of the letter, Nathan had called an extraordinary meeting that brought together not only board members, but also former employees of Hope Clinics and carefully selected journalists. Eleanor was seated to Nathan's right, her presence serving as a constant reminder of the reason behind all this change. On the table, documents detailing the company's new restructuring project awaited presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nathan began, his voice steady and resolute, "we are here today not only to acknowledge the mistakes of the past, but to present a concrete plan for how we intend to correct them." The murmurs in the room quieted. Some of the older board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others showed genuine interest. "Thompson Industries," he continued, "will dedicate 30% of its resources to create a new network of ophthalmology clinics. This time, following the ethical and safety protocols that should have been respected from the start." Eleanor took the floor, her voice carrying an authority that silenced even the most skeptical. "The Anthony Sanders Institute for Ophthalmological Research will be established as an independent entity, overseen by an ethics board that will include doctors, researchers, and patient representatives." The mention of her father's name made her voice waver slightly, but she maintained her composure. Nathan discreetly touched her hand under the table, a gesture of support that did not go unnoticed by Emily, who smiled faintly. "But this is just the beginning," Nathan resumed. "Each family affected by the Vision Project will be contacted individually. We will offer not only financial compensation, but also priority access to the new treatments we develop." One of the older board members, Edward Mendez, stood up. "What about the shareholders? How will we justify this extraordinary expense?" "By showing that ethics and profit are not mutually exclusive," Nathan replied. "Our reputation was built on lies. It's time to rebuild it on truth." The meeting continued for hours, with heated debates and intense questioning. But in the end, the plan was approved by a significant majority. The press present recorded every detail, ensuring that the transformation of Thompson Industries would be properly documented. After the meeting, Nathan found Eleanor in the rooftop garden of the building, her favorite refuge in recent days. She was sitting on a bench, feeling the afternoon breeze on her face. "How are you?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Thinking about my father," she replied. "He always said that medicine wasn't just about curing diseases, but about restoring dignity. He would be proud of you," Nathan said softly, "about how you turned your pain into something constructive." Eleanor smiled, turning her face toward him. "You know what's funny? When I lost my sight, I thought my world had ended, but that loss taught me to see things my eyes never could." "Like what?" asked Nathan, genuinely curious. "The true nature of people, for example. The music in their hearts." She paused, her fingers finding his on the bench. "In you, for instance, I hear a different melody now. No longer that imperial march from before, but something more human." Nathan chuckled softly. "And does this new melody please you?" "Very much," she replied, smiling. "But it's still incomplete, like a work in progress." The moment was interrupted by Emily, who arrived with new information about the families that had begun reaching out after the news of the company's transformation. "We already have 15 families who have agreed to participate in the reconciliation program," she informed, "and Dr. Mendez, the ophthalmologist who worked with your father, Eleanor, has offered to lead the medical team at the new institute." "Great," replied Nathan. "What about the building of the former Hope clinics?" "The renovation starts next week," said Emily, consulting her notes. "The architecture team has already incorporated all the accessibility suggestions Eleanor proposed." When Emily left, Eleanor and Nathan remained silent for a few moments, absorbing the magnitude of the changes underway. "Sometimes I wonder," began Eleanor, "if all of this isn't just an elaborate dream. If tomorrow I won't wake up and find that nothing has changed." Nathan gently squeezed her hand. "It's real, every moment, every decision, every change, and this is just the beginning." "The beginning of what?" she asked, a playful smile on her lips. "Of everything," he replied simply. "Of rebuilding the company, restoring the honor of our families, of—" He hesitated briefly. "Us." Eleanor tilted her head, thoughtful. "Us? Is that a proposal, Mr. Thompson?" "Perhaps," he replied, feeling his heart race. "It depends on your answer." "My answer depends on the right question," she teased. Nathan was about to respond when they were interrupted again, this time by Beatrice, who arrived with urgent news from the Music Institute. "Eleanor," she called, excited, "you won't believe it. That project you proposed, music for children with visual impairments, the Ministry of Culture approved the funding." Eleanor's face lit up at the news. It was another piece fitting into the puzzle of reconstruction, another step in the right direction. "See," said Nathan, watching her joy. "The universe seems to be conspiring in our favor." "It's not the universe," corrected Eleanor, standing up. "It's us, finally making the right choices." The auditorium of the newly inaugurated Anthony Sanders Ophthalmological Research Institute was packed. 3 months had passed since the discovery of Robert Thompson's letter, and the transformation of Thompson Industries had become a case study in business ethics and social responsibility. On stage, Eleanor adjusted the microphone, preparing for her inauguration speech. Beside her, a grand piano awaited the special moment she had planned. "When I was asked to give this speech," she began, her voice clear and emotional, "I thought a lot about the meaning of vision, not just the physical ability to see, but the ability to see beyond appearances, beyond obstacles, beyond the scars of the past." The audience was in absolute silence. In the front row, Nathan watched with pride as she continued, "This institute is not just a medical center. It is a symbol of transformation, redemption, and hope. Here, science and ethics will walk hand in hand, ensuring that what happened in the past will never be repeated." Eleanor paused, her fingers lightly touching the surface of the piano. "But words are not always enough to express certain feelings. So, with your permission, I would like to share something special." She sat at the piano, and the first notes of an original composition filled the auditorium. It was a complex piece, starting with melancholic tones, but gradually transforming into something hopeful and luminous. Nathan closed his eyes, letting the music tell the story they had both lived, the pain, the discovery, the transformation, and finally the hope. When the last note sounded, the silence that followed was almost sacred, before being broken by emotional applause. After the ceremony, as the guests mingled in the new space, Nathan found Eleanor in the room dedicated to the memory of his father. The walls displayed photos of Dr. Anthony Sanders at different stages of his career, alongside his major contributions to ophthalmology. "He would be proud," said Nathan, watching Eleanor gently touch the commemorative plaque. "Not just of the institute, but especially of you." "Sometimes I feel like he's here," she replied, smiling. "Not physically, but in every life that will be transformed in this place." They were interrupted by Emily, who approached with exciting news. "The first results of the stem cell research have arrived from the lab. Dr. Mendez is optimistic about the possibilities." "Great," Nathan replied. "What about the scholarship program?" "We already have 50 applications from young researchers," Emily informed him. "And 3 of the country's top universities have expressed interest in partnerships." When they were alone again, Eleanor turned to Nathan. "It still amazes me how much has changed in such a short time." "Changed for the better," he said, taking her hands in his. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said about unfinished melodies." "And?" she teased, a knowing smile on her lips. "And I think I finally understood what was missing," he continued. "It wasn't just about fixing the mistakes of the past or rebuilding the company. It was about finding the right purpose, the right person." "Nathan Thompson," Eleanor interrupted, laughing, "are you trying to make a formal proposal?" "I'm trying to say that I love you," he replied simply, "and that I want to build something new with you, something that goes beyond companies and institutes, something of our own." Eleanor fell silent for a moment, her face softening with emotion. "Do you know why I fell in love with you?" she finally asked. "Because of my irresistible charm," he joked. "Because you learn to see with your heart," she replied seriously. "And that, more than anything else, proves that people can truly change." At that moment, Beatrice appeared at the door. "Eleanor, the students from the music project have arrived for their first class." Eleanor's face lit up. This was another of her dreams coming true, a program that combined music and rehabilitation for children with visual impairments. "Go," said Nathan, gently kissing her hand. "We have all the time in the world now." As he watched Eleanor walk away with Beatrice, Nathan reflected on how his life had completely changed in just a few months, from arrogance to humility, from power to compassion, from loneliness to true love. The institute would continue to grow, the company would keep transforming, and his story with Eleanor was just beginning. But now, finally, everything was on the right path. A path built not on ambition and power, but on understanding, forgiveness, and love. Emily approached with a few more documents that needed his attention, but before returning to work, Nathan took one last look at the photo of Dr. Sanders on the wall. "I promise to take good care of her," he murmured softly, before turning to face the new challenges ahead. The sound of the piano echoed through the halls of the Music Institute on a Friday afternoon. Eleanor guided the small hands of Julia, her newest 6-year-old student, over the keys. The girl who had lost her sight in a recent accident was having her first lesson. "That's it," encouraged Eleanor, sensing the smile in the child's voice, as the notes of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" filled the room. "See, the music is inside you. We just need to let it out." Outside the room, Nathan watched the scene through the slightly open door, fascinated by how Eleanor turned every lesson into a moment of healing. Over the past few months, the music therapy program had expanded, serving not only children with visual impairments, but also the elderly and those in recovery. "She has a special gift," commented Beatrice, approaching quietly. "I've never seen anyone turn pain into something so beautiful." "That's why we need to expand the program," replied Nathan. "We already have 5 cities interested in replicating the model." The lesson ended, and Julia practically skipped out of the room, guided by her mother. Eleanor followed close behind, her face radiant with the satisfaction of another successful class. "Spying on my lessons, Mr. Thompson," she teased, a playful smile on her lips. "Just admiring the teacher," he replied, pulling her into a quick hug. "I hate to interrupt the moment," said Beatrice, "but we have that meeting with the Department of Culture in 20 minutes. The project had caught the attention of the government, which showed interest in turning it into a public policy. It was another victory, another step in the right direction. On the way to the meeting, Eleanor and Nathan discussed the latest developments at the Anthony Sanders Institute. The research was progressing, and the first experimental treatments, time following all ethical protocols, were showing promising results. "Dr. Mendez called this morning," Nathan commented. "The new cell regeneration technique is exceeding expectations. He wants to present the preliminary results at the international conference next month." Eleanor gently squeezed his hand. "It's incredible how things have turned out, isn't it? From a story of greed and neglect, something has emerged that can truly help people." The meeting at the Department of Culture was a success. The music therapy project would be implemented in all major cities across the country, with the Music Institute serving as the training center for new teachers. Later, as they walked through Central Park, Eleanor and Nathan savored a moment of tranquility. The late afternoon sun warmed their skin, and the distant hum of the city seemed to create a bubble of peace around them. "Did you know this is where my father first brought me after I lost my sight?" Eleanor commented, her fingers intertwined with Nathan's. "He said that even if I couldn't see the park, I could feel it. The sounds, the smells, the breeze. That's when I began to understand that there are many ways to see the world." Nathan stopped walking, turning to face her. "Eleanor, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." She murmured, sensing the change in his tone. But before he could continue, they were interrupted by the ringing of his phone. It was Emily, with urgent news. "Nathan," her voice sounded tense, "I just got a call from Vasquez's lawyer. He wants to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" Nathan asked, his expression hardening. "He's offering information about other executives involved in the Vision Project scheme in exchange for a reduction in his penalty." Eleanor, sensing the tension in Nathan's voice, squeezed his hand. "What are you going to do?" "The decision isn't just mine," he replied, turning to her. "This affects you, your family, all the people who were harmed. Maybe," Eleanor pondered, "it's time to hear what he has to say. Not for revenge, but for closure. For all the families who still don't know the whole truth." Nathan looked at her face for a moment, admiring how she could turn even the most difficult moments into opportunities for healing. "All right," he decided, "but we'll do this the right way. With total transparency involving all the affected families." "And then?" asked Eleanor, a gentle smile on her lips. "Then," replied Nathan, resuming his lighter tone, "I return to that question I was interrupted from asking." So there really is a question?" she teased. "Actually," he said, guiding her to a nearby bench, "there's a story I want to tell you first, about an arrogant man who had to lose everything to truly begin to see." The sun continued its journey toward the horizon, painting the New York sky in shades of pink and orange. In the park, families strolled, children played, and a couple shared a moment that would change their lives forever. The meeting room at the Anthony Sanders Institute was full. Representatives from all the families affected by the Vision Project had been summoned to hear Martinez's revelations. The former executive, now visibly worn, faced the consequences of decades of misguided choices. Eleanor sat beside Nathan, their hands clasped under the table. Dr. Mendez was coordinating the meeting, ensuring that each family had the opportunity to listen and be heard. "Before we begin," said Martinez, his voice stripped of its former arrogance, "I want you to know that nothing I say today can undo the harm we've caused, but you deserve to know the full truth." For the next 2 hours, he detailed the extensive network of corruption and negligence that had allowed the Vision Project to continue even after the first signs of trouble. Names were revealed, documents presented, connections established. For Eleanor, each revelation was like reliving a piece of her past, but this time she wasn't alone. Nathan's presence, steady and constant by her side, turned the pain into strength. When the meeting ended, many tears had been shed, but there was also a collective sense of liberation. The truth, no matter how painful, had its own healing power. "How are you?" asked Nathan as they walked through the Institute's garden, his favorite place for moments of reflection. "At peace," replied Eleanor, surprising him. "It's as if a weight has been lifted from our shoulders. Not just mine, but all those families too." The garden was especially beautiful that afternoon. It was a sensory space, specifically designed for visually impaired patients, with aromatic plants and different textures in each section. "You know," continued Eleanor, touching a lavender leaf, "when I lost my sight, I thought my world had ended. But today I realized that ending was just the beginning of something much greater." Nathan stopped, gently turning her to face him. "Eleanor, about that question I've been trying to ask." "Yes?" she smiled, sensing the anxiety in his voice. "Yesterday marked exactly 1 year since that night you found me passed out on the sidewalk," he began. "A year since you taught me that there are different ways to see the world." Eleanor felt her heart race as Nathan took her hands in his. "That day I was a lost man, blind to the truly important things in life. You didn't just help me up from the sidewalk, you taught me to walk in a completely new direction." "Nathan," she whispered, moved. "That's why," he continued, his voice trembling slightly, I want to ask you a question I've been rehearsing for weeks. Eleanor Sanders, would you do me the honor of building a life by my side? Of continuing to teach me to see the world through the heart? Silent tears streamed down Eleanor's face, but her smile lit up the entire garden. Yes, she replied simply, 1,000 times yes. The moment was interrupted by applause and cheers of joy. Beatrice, Emily, Dr. Mendez, and several staff members from the Institute had discreetly gathered to witness the proposal. Finally, exclaimed Beatrice, running to hug her friend. I thought he'd never find the courage. The news spread quickly. The marriage of the businessman who had transformed an empire of greed into a legacy of hope, with the musician who had turned her own pain into art, was seen as a symbol that true change was possible. Later, alone again in the garden, Eleanor played a soft melody on the piano that had been installed in a gazebo specially built for outdoor performances. What song is that? Asked Nathan, sitting beside her on the piano bench. A new composition, she replied, smiling. I started writing it the day I met you, but I only finished it today. And what's it called? New Perspectives, answered Eleanor, her fingers dancing across the keys, because sometimes we need to lose something to discover a completely new way of seeing. Nathan closed his eyes, letting the music tell their story, the story of two people who had found light in the darkness, hope in adversity, and love in the most unexpected place. The sun set over New York, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that Eleanor couldn't see but could feel in the warmth on her skin. The scent of the garden flowers mingled with the notes of the piano, creating a perfect symphony for the moment. You know what I love most about you? Eleanor asked, her hands finding his on the keys. What? How did you learn to hear the silence, to feel beyond the visible, to love beyond appearances? Nathan smiled, embracing her. I had the best teacher. The New York City Opera House was completely packed that special evening. On stage, the orchestra tuned their instruments as the audience eagerly waited. It was the world premiere of Transformations, an original composition by Eleanor that told through music the journey of transformation she and Nathan had undergone. Backstage, Eleanor adjusted her evening gown, her hands slightly trembling with anticipation. Beatrice was by her side, putting the final touches on her hair. There's a record number of people out there, Beatrice commented, including representatives from music institutes from various countries. This isn't just a concert, Eleanor replied, running her fingers gently over the Braille score. It's a celebration of everything we've achieved over the past 2 years. And there was indeed much to celebrate. The Anthony Sanders Institute had become a global reference for innovative ophthalmological treatments. The music therapy program was now present in dozens of cities, transforming lives through art. And Thompson Industries, under Nathan's leadership, had become an example of how companies could be both profitable and socially responsible. Ready? Nathan asked, entering the dressing room. Even after a year of marriage, Eleanor still smiled at the sound of his footsteps. Almost, she replied. Did you bring what I asked for? Nathan placed a small object in her hands, the key to the old safe where they had found his father's letter. Your lucky charm, he smiled. To remind us of where we came from, Eleanor explained to Beatrice, and how far we've come. The buzz from the audience grew louder. Among the attendees was Charles, the former driver who had become one of the Institute's directors, Emily, now interim CEO of Thompson Industries, while Nathan focused more on social projects, and dozens of families who had been impacted by the couple's work. Dr. Mendez approached with exciting news. Eleanor, that experimental treatment we developed, we just received final approval. We can start clinical trials next month. See? Nathan smiled, gently kissing his wife's forehead. Another dream coming true. Speaking of dream, began Eleanor, a mysterious smile on her lips. I have something to tell you after the concert. Before Nathan could question her, the calls for the start of the show echoed backstage. It was time. Eleanor walked confidently to the grand piano at the center of the stage, guided not by her cane, but by the memory of countless rehearsals and the energy of the audience. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Good evening, her clear, Voice reached every corner of the theatre. The piece I will perform today is not just a musical composition, it is a story of transformation, of redemption, of how love can illuminate even the darkest corners of our souls. Her fingers touched the first notes, and the orchestra gradually joined the melody. The music told a story. It began dark and tense, representing the times of the Vision Project and its consequences, gradually transforming into something more, hopeful as it narrated her meeting with Nathan, culminating in a celebration of renewal and love. From the front row, Nathan watched in awe. Each note seemed to carry a memory, the moment they met, their first conversations at Central Perk, the discovery of the letter, the first kiss in the Institute's garden, the intimate wedding where Eleanor had played a special composition. When the last note sounded, there was a moment of absolute silence before the audience erupted in applause. Eleanor smiled, tears of joy streaming down her face as she received a standing ovation. Later, during the reception, Nathan finally managed, a moment alone with Eleanor in the theater's winter garden. "So," he began, "what did you want to tell me?" Eleanor took his hand, guiding it to her still flat belly. "In a few months," she said softly, "we will have one more person to teach how to see the world with the heart." Nathan was speechless for a moment, pure emotion taking over his being. When he finally managed to speak, his voice was choked. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," she smiled. "And I already know exactly what music I will compose for our baby." The moment was interrupted by Beatrice, who came to inform them that journalists were waiting for interviews. But before they returned to the reception, Nathan hugged Eleanor tightly. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For teaching me that sometimes we need to lose our sight to truly begin to see." 5 years had passed since that fateful night when Eleanor found Nathan unconscious on the sidewalk. The Anthony Sanders Institute, now an impressive complex occupying an entire block, was in celebration. It was the day of the inauguration of the new pediatric wing, a dream that had finally come true. In the sensory garden, specially decorated for the occasion, Eleanor sat at the piano while her 4-year-old daughter Clara played with the keys. The girl had inherited her mother's musical talent and her father's determination. "Mummy," called Clara, her sweet voice filling the morning air, "tell me again the story of how you and Daddy met." Eleanor smiled, pulling her daughter onto her lap. "It was a special night," she began, her hands automatically finding the piano keys to accompany the narrative. "Your father was a man who could only see with his eyes until a warrior princess saved him," Clara chimed in, already knowing the story by heart. "And who is this warrior princess stealing my wife's attention?" joked Nathan, approaching. With a bouquet of fragrant flowers, roses and lavender, Eleanor's favorites. The garden was beginning to fill with guests for the inauguration ceremony. Dr. Mendez, now with completely white hair, was animatedly chatting with a group of young doctors about the latest advances in regenerative treatments. Beatrice, who had become the director of the music therapy program, was organizing the children's choir for the special performance. Emily approached the trio, carrying a folder of documents. "The final numbers are in," she announced proudly. "The Institute has already treated over 10,000 patients, and the music program is present in 200 cities. "And the new research?" asked Nathan, adjusting Clara in his arms. "The results are promising," replied Emily. "The treatment developed by Dr. Mendez's team is showing an 80% success rate in early cases of visual degeneration." Eleanor rose from the piano, her hand naturally finding Nathan's. "Do you know what this means? Other children will have the chance I never had." The inauguration ceremony was touching. Clara, along with other children from the music program, performed a special version of New Perspectives, the composition Eleanor had created on the day of the marriage proposal. There wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. During his speech, Nathan surprised everyone with a special announcement. "Today we are not just inaugurating a new wing of the Institute. We are also launching the Eleanor Sanders Fund, which will offer scholarships to young musicians with visual impairments across the country." Eleanor, who hadn't known about the surprise, felt tears of joy streaming down her face. Clara ran to hug her parents, creating a moment captured by dozens of photographers present. Later, when most of the guests had left, the family remained in the sensory garden. Clara had fallen asleep in her father's arms, while Eleanor played softly on the piano. 5 years, Nathan reflected, watching his wife. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday you found me on that sidewalk. And sometimes it feels like we've lived several lives since then, Eleanor added, smiling, each one richer than the last. The sound of familiar footsteps announced the arrival of Charles, now a doting grandfather to Clara. The final documents for the agreement with the Department of Health have been signed, he announced. The Institute's model will be replicated in 5 states. Which means, added Emily, joining the group, that more families will have access to quality treatments regardless of their financial situation. It was everything my father dreamed of, Eleanor said softly. Accessible, ethical, humane medicine. And music, Nathan added. Lots of music. Clara stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about warrior princesses and magical melodies. Eleanor returned to the piano, playing the lullaby she had composed especially for her daughter. You know what amazes me the most? Nathan asked, gently rocking Clara. How everything fell perfectly into place. Every difficult moment brought us here. Like a musical composition, Eleanor agreed. Every note, even the dissonant ones, plays its part in the final harmony. The sun began to set, painting the garden with golden hues that Eleanor could feel warming her skin. The scent of flowers blended with the piano notes, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Mommy, Clara murmured, waking gently, play that song that makes the heart smile. Eleanor smiled, her fingers finding the right keys without hesitation. The melody she began to play was new, not yet shared with the public. It was a piece that spoke of love, family, overcoming, and most importantly, how true vision comes from the heart. Nathan sat beside her on the piano bench, Clara nestled between them. There, in that perfect moment, they were more than a family. They were living proof that love can turn even the most unlikely stories into symphonies of hope. And they lived happily ever after? Clara asked drowsily. No, my love, Eleanor replied, smiling. We live happily every day, building our own light. Note by note, moment by moment, love by love.